This webinar is called the 7 Steps to Launch Your Coaching Program. Now the next step is to create a launch calendar. I've developed somewhat of a template just from doing, so many launches over the last, I'd say 6 years. And for my launches, there are 6 main phases. And I would suggest, unless you have another reason to follow something different, I would suggest you just, follow this. The first phase is you plan the launch out. You get out your calendar, you plan out when you're going to do the videos or the webinars or whatever however you're going to deliver your content, and you work backwards. So if you want the program to start December 1st of this year, well, that means that you need to start selling it November 1st, let's say. And that's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. It has to be a month out. It depends what kind of program you're selling, what kind of market you have, et cetera. But let's just pretend you got to sell it in November. You know that there's a launch cycle that's going to take 4 weeks, let's say. So that means you actually have to drop the first video in October. And in order to get the list ready, you've got to do some nurturing sequences, et cetera. So you plan it all backwards and you realize this whole thing start to finish might be 5 months. It might be 6 months. And then you take a look at the holidays, make sure you're not doing anything right around Christmas or Thanksgiving or any other time that your seeker might not be available, et cetera. So you've got to really be strategic with the planning of the launch, and don't be careless with this. I've been careless in the past, started a launch, realized like 3 weeks in, it's Christmas, or people are now going to summer vacation, or there's this other thing that I didn't see because I didn't take the time to look at the calendar. So be very strategic with the planning of your launch. And then the next phase is to engage your audience. Now, there are many variations here. It depends on if you have a big community already or if you're building them from scratch. So I'm not going to dive into the details of this so much. Otherwise, that in itself could be a whole webinar. But you've got to engage the crowd. Sometimes that means planting seeds, letting them know that you're getting ready to teach content in a couple weeks and just warm them up. Or sometimes that means re-engage the crowd. We recently did a launch in a market that I hadn't been nurturing for a long, long time. And so we had to add on to the front of the launch an extended nurture period because I hadn't been in constant conversation with this market. And so I think it was at least 3 weeks. It might have even been a month and a half that we knew we had to warm them up and get them back into conversation before we even start trying to send them to our blog or get inside of a launch. So there's an engagement period that's important because you need people to pay attention when you start your launch process. And then the next phase is when you start delivering whatever content you're going to provide. So sometimes that's a webinar, sometimes that's videos or a video series, sometimes it's free reports, checklists, some kind of digital downloads. Sometimes it could even be live events like teleseminars or in-person events, but you're delivering now the education piece, right? So the beginning of any launch should involve you educating your market, your clientele. And that could be a couple weeks. It could be 4, 5, 6 weeks. It depends. I would say it's usually between, 2 and 4 weeks for most people. But as with everything, there's variation in this phase as well. After you've delivered your content, then you're going to start the selling. That's where you invite people to a sales page, you invite them to a phone call, you invite them to come to a live event, you invite them somewhere where they can purchase your product. Now, one of the mistakes that I made early on is I only had a couple doors open for people to purchase. And that was a huge mistake because some people are listening to your teleseminars, but they're not watching the webinar. And when they're listening to the teleseminar, they don't have a link to click on. And it's just really easy to lose a lot of people if you're not careful in this phase. You've got to open as many doors as you possibly can and get people on as many paths as you can possibly manage because people consume information differently and their cycles are different in terms of when they buy. You're going to have some people that take action right away. You're going to have some people that need to think about it and need to hear from you 3 or 4 or 5 different times before they decide yes, right? And so you've really got to plan out this invitation period strategically. There's got to be multiple doors for people to go through, multiple ways for them to consume the sale, right, to consume the pitch. It could be on a webinar, it could be on a phone call, it could be via email, it could be on a sales page, it could be in a video, it could be a recorded phone call. There's many, many ways, and you've just got to take all of those things into consideration. Now, I'm not saying you have to do all of them, but you have to do enough that you're going to reach as many people as possible. So that's the invitation phase, right? Where people are now buying your program. And sometimes that will last a week. Sometimes it'll last 2 months. Most of my launches have an invitation phase that's at least a month long. Now, that's a little bit against the grain of the way that most people do launches. And, I've just found that for my markets, that's what works better. And I sell more when my launch is longer and my invitation period is longer. Some people find the opposite. They actually sell more when they only give people, 7 days or 10 days or 14 days or something to make their choice. So again, we got to figure out what works best for you. Then after the invitation phase comes the follow-up and follow-through phase. This is where the majority of your sales will actually come from. And so many people don't pay attention to this, or they don't pay enough attention to this, right? So many people are focused. The ones that are excited about sales and they got the invitation phase down, they're so focused about the invitation phase, they don't put enough energy on the follow-up or follow-through phase, right? And you've got to nurture people who don't say yes right away and don't purchase right away. Those people have questions. Maybe that looks like you getting on a Q&A phone call with them as a group. Maybe it looks like you getting on the phone one-on-one with them. Maybe you send emails asking them if they have questions or answering some of the most common questions. But that follow-up and follow-through phase, if done correctly, will probably create, I would say, 50 to 75% of your sales. At least it does for me. So that is a critical piece that most people mess up. And finally, phase number 6 is upsell, downsell, side sell, and just all around nurturing of your community. And part of your community, the biggest part of your community, are the people that didn't buy your program. And most people, in my experience, forget about the people that didn't buy the program. And you've got buyers in there, they just didn't buy that program. You'd be surprised at how many people will say no to a $200 group coaching program and say yes to a $4,000 private coaching program because that's what they want. And if you're not nurturing them, you're not doing the follow through, you're not engaging them in the side sell, upsell, downsell, then you're going to miss out on a lot of that. So in my experience and my estimation, I would say that most coaches specifically that do a launch probably leave, I would say, between 70 and 80% of their sales on the table because they miss those last 2 phases right there, the follow-up, follow-through, and the nurture sequence, right? And people don't want you to just try to sell them and then forget about them. So when you sell this program, when you close this launch, don't just leave those people in the dirt, right? Continue to send them blog posts, continue to send them other valuable content so that the next time you do a launch, they'll be even more receptive and attentive for you, okay? So that's step number 4. That's the launch calendar, setting it up to operate properly.